The ship was cold. Myra pressed her back against the metal wall and pulled her knees to her chest. Around her, dozens of humans sat in silence. Some cried quietly. Others stared at nothing. The air smelled like fear and sweat and something else. Something animal. 3 days ago, Myra had been helping her mother in the greenhouse on 442B. Their colony was small and poor. The crops were failing again. Food was running low. But they were free. They were home. Then the ships came down from the sky. The Myra had heard stories about them on the colony's old radio. Tall creatures that looked like wolves walking on 2 legs. They had conquered 17 star systems. They took what they wanted, and what they wanted most was slaves. The door at the end of the holding room opened with a loud hiss. Myra looked up and saw them for the first time. They were bigger than she had imagined, 8 feet tall with gray and black fur. Their eyes were golden and their teeth were long and sharp. They wore armor made of dark metal and carried weapons that hummed with energy. They moved like hunters, like predators who had never known fear. The leader stepped forward. His fur was darker than the others and scars covered his face. A metal badge on his chest showed his rank, Commander. He looked at the humans the way a farmer looks at livestock. "Stand," he said. His voice was deep and rough. The translator device on his collar turned his growls into words. "All of you, now." The humans stood. Myra struggled to her feet. Her left leg was bad. It had been bad since she was 7 years old when she fell from a broken ladder in the colony's storage building. The bone never healed right. Her mother could not afford the medicine to fix it. So Myra limped. She had always limped. The soldiers walked among them. They looked at teeth. They felt muscles. They made notes on glowing tablets. Myra understood. They were sorting them, deciding who was useful and who was not. A young soldier stopped in front of her. He grabbed her arm and squeezed. Then he looked at her leg. He laughed and said something to another soldier in their language. They both laughed. Myra did not understand the words yet, but she understood the meaning. She was small. She was weak. She was broken. Commander walked over. He stood in front of Myra and looked down at her. She was 16 years old and barely came up to his chest. He could kill her with one hand. They both knew it. "This one," the young soldier said. Myra would later learn what that word meant. Meat that walks. The lowest rank. Not worth hunting. Only good for the hardest labor or for feeding to young pups during their training. Nodded slowly. "Yes, mark her." 2 soldiers grabbed Myra's arms and pulled her forward. They pushed her down onto her knees and tore the sleeve from her shirt. Another soldier came forward carrying a metal rod. The end of it glowed orange with heat. The brand. Myra had seen them mark the others. She had heard their screams. She knew what was coming. The hot metal pressed into the skin of her shoulder. The pain was like nothing she had ever felt. It burned through her flesh and filled her whole body with fire. The smell of her own burning skin reached her nose. But Myra did not scream. She did not know why. Maybe she was too scared. Maybe she was too angry. Maybe some part of her refused to give them what they wanted. Whatever the reason, she stayed silent. Her body shook. Tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. And then she did something strange. Something that would stay with Commander for years to come. She looked up at him. She looked directly into his golden eyes, and she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had already decided something. Someone who had already made a choice that they could not see or understand. Felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt uncomfortable. For just a moment, he felt like he was the one being watched, like he was the one being judged. He pushed the feeling away. She was nothing. A crippled child from a dying colony. She would be dead within a year. They all would. "Take her to the labor transport," he ordered. "She goes to the mines." The soldiers dragged Myra away. She did not fight. She did not cry. She just watched everything around her. She watched the soldiers and how they moved. She watched the layout of the ship. She watched and she remembered. The transport ship took them to Prime, the home world of the Dominion. Myra saw it through a small window as they descended, a dark planet with tall mountains and deep valleys, cities built from black stone, ships flying everywhere like insects. They landed near a great hole in the ground, the entrance to the mines. Thousands of slaves from dozens of different species were being marched inside. Some were tall and thin with blue skin. Others were short and covered in scales. Some had 4 arms. Some had no arms at all. All of them wore the same look of hopeless defeat. A guard pushed Myra toward the line. "Move, meat," he said. Myra stumbled but caught herself. Her leg hurt, everything hurt, but she kept walking. As she entered the darkness of the mines, she took one last look at the sky. Somewhere up there was her home, her mother, everything she had lost. She touched the fresh brand on her shoulder. It still burned. It would leave a scar that she would carry forever. The mark of something worthless. The thought they knew what that mark meant. They thought it meant she was nothing, that she would break and die like all the others. They were wrong. Myra walked into the darkness of the mines, and deep inside her chest, in a place that could not see or touch or brand, something began to grow. It was small at first, just a tiny flame. But flames can grow. And sometimes the smallest spark can burn down an empire. The mines of Prime were hell. Myra learned this on her first day. The tunnels went deep into the planet, so deep that the heat from the core made the air feel like an oven. The slaves worked 18 hours a day digging for rare metals. They used these metals to build their ships and weapons. The slaves used their bare hands and simple tools. The food was bad. The water was worse. The guards beat anyone who worked too slowly, and the darkness never ended. Down in the mines there was no sun, no day or night. Only work and pain and the constant fear of death. Most slaves died within 3 solar cycles. That was what the guards said. 3 cycles and the mines would break you. Your body would give out. Your spirit would die. And then they would throw your body into the deep pits where no one would ever find it. Myra had been in the mines for 11 cycles. She survived because she was smart. Not strong, not fast, just smart. In the first days, she watched everything. She saw which guards were cruel and which ones were lazy. She learned the patrol schedules. She memorized the tunnel maps. She counted the steps between important places until she could walk the mines blind. She also learned their language, the spoken growls and barks that seemed impossible to understand. But Myra listened. Every day she listened to the guards talk. She matched their sounds to their actions. Slowly, word by word, she began to understand. By the end of her first year, she could speak well enough to follow orders without translation. By the end of her second year, she could understand their private conversations. The guards never knew. They never even thought to check. Why would a piece of meat learn to speak? But the most important thing Myra did was find others like her. The mines held thousands of slaves from many different worlds. Most of them had given up hope, but some had not. Some still had fire in their eyes. Myra found them one by one. The first was a race of beings with bodies made of living crystal. They had conquered his world 200 years ago. His people were natural engineers. They understood machines and technology in ways other races could not. Was old and cracked and missing pieces of his crystalline body, but his mind was still sharp. The second was a species with green skin and 4 arms. Her people had been healers and doctors. They had wiped them out completely. Was one of the last of her kind. She knew medicine. She knew how to fix broken bodies with almost nothing. The third was human like Myra, an old soldier from one of the first human colonies they had taken. His body was weak now. His hands shook and his back was bent. But he had fought in wars. He knew how to kill, and he knew how to teach others to kill. They met in secret. In the deep tunnels where the guards never went, in the shadows between shifts, they talked, they planned, they waited. Then came the night that changed everything. Myra was working in a far tunnel alone. A young overseer found her there. His name was, he was cruel even by standards. He liked to hurt slaves, especially the small ones, especially the females. He grabbed Myra by the hair and dragged her deeper into the tunnel. He laughed as she struggled. "No one will hear you," he said. "No one will come. You are just meat." He was right about one thing: no one heard. Myra had been carrying a piece of mining slag in her pocket for 3 months. She had sharpened it every night against the tunnel stones until it was as sharp as any knife. She had practiced the motion 1,000 times in the darkness of her sleeping cell. Never saw it coming. The sharp edge cut across his throat before he could make a sound. Blood sprayed across the tunnel wall. He fell to the ground, still trying to understand what had happened. He died with confusion in his golden eyes. Myra stood over him. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. She had never killed before. She had never even hurt anyone before. But she did not feel sorry. She did not feel guilty. She only felt one thing: free. She looked down at the body. Then she took her sharp piece of slag and carved something into his chest. 3 symbols: K442B, her colony, her home, her people. When she was done, she cleaned herself up as best she could. She hid the weapon, and she went back to work as if nothing had happened. The body was found the next day. They were furious. A slave had killed an overseer. This was impossible. This was against the natural order. Slaves did not fight back. Meat did not bite. They questioned everyone. They beat many slaves. They killed a few as examples, but no one talked. No one knew anything. Because Myra had been careful, she had been patient, she had been invisible. 3 weeks later, another guard disappeared. Then another. Each body was found with the same mark carved into it: K442B. They did not know what it meant, but the slaves did. Word spread through the tunnels like fire through dry grass. Someone was fighting back. Someone was hunting the hunters. They began to call her by a name, an old word from an ancient legend: Akan, the one who hunts the hunters. Myra heard the name and smiled, the same smile she had given Commander on the day he branded her. The flame inside her was growing, and soon it would be too big to hide. In the deep darkness of the mines, surrounded by death and despair, something new was being born: a resistance, a rebellion, an army of the broken and the forgotten. And at its heart was a limping girl with a scar on her shoulder and a fire in her eyes that they had been too blind to see. The hunters had marked her as the weakest. They had no idea what they had created. Fear was something they did not understand. They were the hunters, they were the strong. For 1,000 years they had taken what they wanted and killed what they did not need. Fear was something prey felt, not them, never them. But in the mines beneath Prime, something strange was happening. Guards were dying, not in accidents, not from cave-ins. They were being killed, murdered in the dark by someone they could not find. At first, the commanders thought it was one angry slave, a problem that would solve itself. They increased patrols. They made the punishments harsher. They killed slaves at random to send a message. The killings continued. Then they thought it was a small group, maybe 3 or 4 slaves working together. They brought in special investigators. They used torture. They promised freedom to anyone who gave information. No one talked. The truth was worse than anything they imagined. It was not one slave. It was not a small group. It was hundreds, maybe thousands. A network that stretched through every tunnel, every work crew, every sleeping cell in the mines. And at the center of it all was Myra. She had built something impossible, a resistance hidden in plain sight. Every slave who had been marked as worthless was now part of her network. Every species that they had conquered and forgotten now worked together. They shared information. They protected each other. They waited for the signal. They never saw it because they never looked. Why would they? These were slaves, broken things, meat that walked. They were not smart enough to organize. They were not brave enough to fight. That was what they believed, and that belief would destroy them. The whispers spread through the minds like a disease. The slaves spoke of the Akan in hushed voices, the one who hunts the hunters. Some said she was a ghost. Some said she was a demon. Some said she was just a story that scared slaves told to give themselves hope. But the guards knew she was real. They knew because their friends kept dying. Finally, the High Command decided to act. They sent one of their greatest warriors to solve the problem, Pack Lord X. He was a legend among his people. He had crushed rebellions on 12 different worlds. He had killed more enemies than he could count. When he smiled, you could see the teeth of his victims hanging from his necklace. X arrived at the mines with 50 of his best hunters. He called all the slaves to the main cavern. Thousands of broken bodies standing in rows under the harsh lights. He walked among them slowly, smelling the air, looking for weakness, looking for fear. "I know there is a killer among you," he said. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "I know you think you are clever, you think you can hide, but I am X. I have hunted prey across 100 worlds. I have never failed to find what I seek." He stopped walking. He had reached the section where they were kept, the weakest of the weak, the ones not even worth hunting. "Bring me the human female," he said, "the one with the bad leg." 2 guards grabbed Myra and dragged her forward. They threw her at X's feet. He looked down at her with golden eyes full of amusement. She was small, thin. Her leg was twisted. The brand on her shoulder marked her as worthless meat. She should have been shaking with fear. She was not shaking. "You are the one they fear," X laughed. The sound was loud and cruel. "This is the great Akan, a broken child who can barely walk." Myra looked up at him. Her face was calm, her eyes were steady. "Fear is learned," she said quietly. "I am a good teacher." For a moment, something passed across X's face, something that might have been doubt, but it was gone quickly. He laughed again and kicked her hard in the stomach. "Put her in isolation," he ordered. "Tomorrow, I will make an example of her. I will show these slaves what happens to those who forget their place." The guards dragged Myra away. She did not struggle. She did not cry. She just let them take her. Because everything was going according to plan. That night, X slept in the commander's quarters near the main mine entrance. He was confident. He had found the leader. Tomorrow, he would break her in front of everyone. The rebellion would end before it truly began. He was wrong. At exactly midnight, the lights in the mines went out. All of them. Every tunnel, every cavern, every guard station. Complete darkness. They had spent months learning the power systems. He knew exactly which wires to cut. In that darkness, the slaves moved. They knew the tunnels by touch. They had practiced for this moment 1,000 times. Each group had a target. Each target was a guard. 17 guards died in the first minute. They died without seeing their killers. They died without making a sound. Each body was marked with the same symbol, K442B. When the emergency lights finally came on, the slaves were back in their cells, sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had happened. But 17 guards were dead, and Myra was gone. X found her standing in the main cavern when he came running with his hunters. She was not alone. Behind her stood hundreds of slaves. They held weapons made from mining tools. Their eyes burned with something they had never seen in slaves before. Rage. "You were right about one thing," Myra said. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the cavern. "I am the one they fear, but you got the rest wrong. I am not prey. I have never been prey." She raised her hand, and it was a blade taken from a dead guard. "Tonight the hunting ends. Tonight we stop being meat." She pointed the blade at X. "Tonight you learn what it feels like to be hunted." The pack lord bared his teeth and drew his weapon. Behind him, his hunters did the same. "You are fools," he growled. "You cannot win, we are." Myra smiled, that same smile she had given on the day she was branded. "You were," she said. "Now you are just prey." The battle began. And in the darkness of the mines, the revolution was finally born. The battle in the mines lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Pack Lord X was dead. Myra had killed him herself, not with tricks, not with surprise. She had fought him blade to blade in front of everyone. He was faster. He was stronger. He was a warrior who had trained his whole life for combat. But Myra had something he did not have. She had nothing left to lose. When she finally put her blade through his heart, she did not celebrate. She simply pulled out a fang from his mouth and hung it around her neck. A trophy. A message. The mines of Prime were free. But Myra knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion was huge. It covered 17 star systems. It had millions of soldiers. The freedom of one mine meant nothing if the rest of the empire still stood. So Myra did something that no slave had ever done before. She went on the attack. In the weeks that followed, her army grew. Freed slaves from the mines joined her. Prisoners from nearby labor camps escaped and found her. Ships were stolen. Weapons were taken. What started as a few hundred rebels became thousands. But Myra was smart. She did not try to fight them directly. She did not try to hold territory. She knew they would crush her in open battle. Instead, she fought a different kind of war. A war of symbols. Every time her forces attacked, they left the mark. K442b, the symbol of a forgotten colony, the symbol of the worthless. It appeared on destroyed guard stations, on captured ships, on the bodies of fallen soldiers. They tried to hide the attacks from their people. They said the rebellion was small. They said it was being contained. They said the slaves would be crushed soon. But the truth spread anyway. Slaves across the Dominion heard the stories. They heard about the human girl who killed a pack lord. They heard about the army of the broken who had risen from the mines. They heard about the Akan. And they began to hope. Myra knew that hope was a weapon, the most powerful weapon of all, so she decided to use it. They had been working on a plan. They used a network of communication stations to send messages across their empire. If they could capture just one station, they could broadcast to every ship, every colony, every world in space. It was a suicide mission. The stations were heavily guarded. Even if they captured one, they would only have a few minutes before forces arrived to destroy them. Myra did not care. Some things were worth dying for. The attack on communication station Theta 7 was fast and brutal. Myra led the assault herself. They lost many good fighters breaking through the defenses, but they succeeded. For 10 minutes, they controlled the station. 10 minutes was enough. Myra stood in front of the broadcast camera. Behind her, alarms were screaming. Through the windows, she could see warships approaching. She had maybe 5 minutes before they blasted the station into dust. She took a breath and began to speak. "My name is Myra. I was born on a small human colony called 442b. 12 years ago, they came to my world. They killed my father. They took my mother. They put me in chains and branded me as worthless, as meat that walks." She held up her arm, showing the camera the scar on her shoulder. "This is the mark they gave me. The lowest of the low. They looked at me and saw nothing. They looked at all of us and saw nothing, just weak creatures to be used and thrown away." Her voice grew stronger. "They were wrong. We are not weak. We are not meat. We are survivors. Every species they conquered, every world they burned, every child they stole and put in chains. We remember, we are still here, and we are done being prey." She pulled the fang from around her neck and held it up. "This belonged to Pack Lord X. He was sent to crush us. I killed him with my own hands. He died confused. He could not understand how a piece of meat could hurt him." She looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were hard, her voice was steady. Your chains are not unbreakable, your captors are not invincible. They taught us we were prey, but prey can learn, prey can grow, prey can become something else. The station shook, the ships were firing. Rise up, all of you, on every world, in every mine, in every camp. Show them what the broken can do when they stop being afraid. Show them what happens when the hunted become the hunters. She smiled that same smile. My name is Myra, I am, and I am coming for them all. The broadcast ended as the first missiles hit the station. Myra and her team barely escaped in a stolen shuttle. But the message had been sent. Billions of beings across the Dominion had seen it. Billions of slaves had heard her words. And billions of hearts began to beat faster. The rebellion started within days, first on the prison moons of, then in the factory cities of Prime, then on a dozen more worlds, then 100. Slaves who had been quiet for generations suddenly remembered that they had hands, hands that could hold weapons, hands that could fight. They tried to stop it. They sent their armies. They burned cities. They killed thousands. But for every rebel they killed, 10 more rose to take their place. Because Myra had given them something they could not take away. She had given them hope. She had given them rage. She had given them a reason to fight. And across the stars, in mines and camps and cells, the broken and the forgotten looked at their chains and finally asked the question that would bring an empire to its knees. Why should we be afraid? The answer was simple. They should not be, not anymore. The hunters had built their empire on fear. Now that fear was gone. And in its place was fire. The final battle came to Prime. It took 2 years to reach this point. 2 years of fighting across the stars. 2 years of blood and death and sacrifice. But finally, the coalition fleet hung in orbit above the ships from 100 different species. Vessels stolen, captured, and built in secret. An army of the broken and the forgotten, come to end the empire that had broken them. Commander stood on the bridge of the last defense station and watched the enemy ships fill the sky. He remembered a day, long ago, when he had branded a small human girl. He remembered the way she had smiled at him. He had not understood that smile then. He understood it now. The battle lasted 9 days. They fought with everything they had. They were defending their families, their entire way of life. They were warriors born and bred for combat. Even facing impossible odds, they refused to surrender. But Myra had learned their tactics. She had studied their culture. She knew their pride and their weaknesses. She used it all against them. On the 3rd day, she destroyed their orbital defense network. On the 5th day, her forces landed on the surface. On the 7th day, they reached the capital city. On the 9th day, they stood at the gates of the Dominion Council chamber. The great black building had stood for 1,000 years. It was here that the high commanders had ruled their empire. It was here that they had sent orders to conquer worlds and enslave billions. It was here that they had decided that some species were hunters and others were meat. Now it was surrounded by an army of meat. Myra walked through the ruined streets toward the council chamber. Her legs still hurt. It always hurt. She still limped with every step, but she did not stop. She had not stopped for 12 years. She would not stop now. The doors of the chamber were huge, made of metal taken from 100 conquered worlds. They had never been opened by force in all of history. Myra nodded too. The old pressed a button on a small device. The charges they had planted exploded. The great doors fell. Inside, the council chamber was almost empty. Most of the high commanders had fled or died in the fighting. Only one remained. Commander stood in the center of the room. His armor was damaged. His fur was matted with blood. But he still held his weapon. He still stood like a hunter. Myra walked toward him. Around her, her soldiers kept their distance. They knew this moment belonged to her. So said, his voice was tired, the meat has come to finish the kill. I am not here to kill you, Myra said. Laughed, it was a bitter sound. Then what do you want, human? Surrender, I would rather die. I know, Myra said. That is why I am not offering you death. She stopped a few feet away from him. For a long moment they just looked at each other. The hunter and the hunted, the predator and the prey, except now no one could tell which was which. I have watched your kind my whole life, Myra said. You believe that strength is everything, that the strong deserve to rule and the weak deserve to serve. You built an empire on that belief. You conquered worlds because of it. You took everything from me because of it. She touched the scar on her shoulder, the brand of. You looked at me and saw what I could not do. You saw my bad leg. You saw my small body. You saw a child from a poor colony with nothing to offer, and you decided I was worthless. She stepped closer, close enough that could have killed her with one swing of his blade, but he did not move. You never once thought about what I would do. That is the difference between hunters and survivors. Hunters choose easy prey because they can. Survivors become strong because nothing is ever easy for them. Every day of my life has been a fight. Every step has been a struggle. You think that made me weak? She shook her head slowly. It made me unbreakable. His hand trembled on his weapon. In his eyes, she could see something she had never seen in a before. Defied. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Myra reached into her belt and pulled out a metal rod, recognized it immediately. A branding iron, the same kind that had been used on her 12 years ago. I want you to live, Myra said. I want you to carry this mark for the rest of your life. I want you to tell your children and your what happens when you mistake scars for weakness. I want you to remember that the meat you threw away is the one who brought down your empire. She heated the iron until it glowed orange. Kneel. For a long moment did not move. Everything in his nature screamed at him to fight, to die with honor, to never bow to prey. But then he looked around the ruined council chamber. He thought about the dead commanders, the fallen warriors, the empire that was gone forever. And slowly, painfully, the great hunter knelt. Myra pressed the brand into his chest, the symbol of meat that walks, the mark he had given her. Did not scream, but tears ran down his face. When it was done, Myra stepped back. Live with it, she said. Remember what it feels like. She turned and walked away, her leg dragging, her back straight, a broken girl who had shattered an empire. Years later, the Galactic Council would form from the ashes of the Dominion. Humanity would have a founding seat. So would and dozens of other species that had once been slaves. When they asked Myra for a symbol to represent their new alliance, she gave them only one image, the brand of, with a single human word written across it. Unbowed. In the schools of 100 worlds, children would learn about the collapse. They would study the battles and the politics and the strategy. But in the quiet places, among the survivors and the freed, they told a different story. They spoke of a girl who came in chains and left with an empire at her feet. They said she taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The strong can be broken, the mighty can fall, but those who have nothing left to lose have everything to fight for. And humanity, they said, had the strangest gift of all, the ability to take the worst thing that ever happened to them and use it as fuel, to turn pain into power, to turn scars into strength. They had marked their weakest cub. She had carved her own mark into history. And she had taught the hunters what it truly meant to be prey.